A millionaire. He sees his pregnant ex-wife working as a waitress. What happened next changed everything. Julian Griffin had a solid gold Mont Blanc pen suspended in the air, 3 millimeters from signing the most lucrative deal of his life when the whole world stopped turning. He was seated at the head table of the Golden Wattle, Sydney's most exclusive and elite restaurant in Point Piper. Around him, 3 real estate executives waited for his signature to close a $40 million AUD acquisition. Everything was perfect. Julian's navy suit, impeccable, custom-made, no tie, yet projecting the absolute power of a 32-year-old man who had conquered the city. His short, perfectly sculpted beard, his dominant posture. He was the king of the world, a man who always won, a man who had overcome the greatest humiliation of his life, or so he believed. His gaze, cold and calculating, drifted for a second from the paper on the white-clothed table, and that was when he saw her. The impact stole the oxygen from his lungs. It was like crashing into a concrete wall at 200 kilometers per hour. About 15 meters away, in the dimly lit area of the dining room, a woman was cleaning a table. The contrast was violent, almost grotesque. Amidst the elegant decor of golden hues, marble, and fine glassware, the woman wore a garish orange, cheap and worn cleaning uniform with white collars and trim. She completely mismatched the surroundings, but it wasn't the uniform that paralyzed Julian. It was her, Violette, his ex-wife. The pen slipped from Julian's fingers and hit the glass table with a dry thud, staining the $1 million document with a thick drop of black ink. "Everything all right, Julian?" asked one of the executives, frowning. Julian didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't breathe. His dark eyes were fixed on the woman in the distance. His mind, accustomed to processing numbers and strategies in fractions of a second, collapsed before the irrational image in front of him. 9 months ago, Violet Maxwell, the woman he loved with blind devotion, had thrown divorce papers in his face. She had told him she was fed up with him, that she had found someone better, someone who actually had time for her, and had left without taking a single cent, supposedly to live a life of luxury in Europe with a European heir. Julian had spent almost a year hating her, swallowing the poison of betrayal, drowning his pain in work, until he became a cold, untouchable steel magnate. But the woman 15 meters away wasn't in Paris, wasn't adorned with jewels or wearing haute couture. Violet was frantically, erratically scrubbing the wood of a table with a white cloth, as if her life depended on removing a sauce stain. Her light brown hair, which once always fell in perfect waves, was now pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her fair skin was red. Thick drops of sweat ran down her forehead and neck. She looked gaunt, pale, with deep violet circles under her eyes, her gaze fixed downwards, utterly broken. And then Violet turned sideways to reach the other end of the table. Julian's heart stopped abruptly. Beneath that suffocating, cheap orange uniform, Violet's belly was enormous, round, heavy, and low. A very advanced pregnancy, at least 8 months. Julian's brain made the mathematical calculation with the speed of a whip. 9 months since the divorce, 8 months of pregnancy. "No," Julian mumbled, his voice rough, barely a whisper in his throat. "Julian, Mr. Griffin," the lawyer across the table insisted, alarmed by the cadaverous pallor that had covered the businessman's face. Julian stood up with a shove. The heavy oak chair screeched violently against the marble floor, attracting curious glances from a couple of nearby tables. Julian didn't care. He didn't care about the contract, or the $40 million, or his reputation. All the noise of the luxurious restaurant, the clinking of baccarat crystal glasses, the silver cutlery, the soft laughter of Sydney's elite, faded, becoming a dull hum. He only saw her. Violet paused for a second, dropped the cloth on the table, and placed a hand at the base of her back, arching with an expression of mute pain. She breathed through her mouth, exhausted, as if the weight of her own body and the creature within her were about to break her spine. This woman, who once owned half his empire, the woman who walked with her head held high and a radiant smile. Now she looked like a cornered animal on the verge of physical collapse. Julian took his first step towards her. His fists were so clenched at the sides of his navy suit that his knuckles turned white. A toxic mix of anger, confusion, and visceral panic began to boil in his veins. What the hell was going on? Where was the millionaire lover? Why was the woman who destroyed his life cleaning up other people's messes? And whose child was this, deforming her body and forcing her to drag her feet? Julian advanced down the central aisle, dodging a waiter. His serious, relentless, and contemplative gaze never left her. He was going to demand answers. He was going to destroy her with words if necessary. He was going to make her pay for every sleepless night. But before he could reach her, another figure stepped into the scene, blocking Violet's path. It was Alistair Vance, the general manager of the Golden Wattle, a 4-5-year-old man in an impeccable grey suit, with a tense face and the arrogance of someone who enjoys humiliating those below his status. Julian stopped 3 meters away, partially hidden by a large marble column and an extravagant floral arrangement. He was close enough to hear everything, but out of his ex-wife's line of sight. Alistair looked at the table Violet had just cleaned, and then ran an index finger along the wooden edge. He lifted it into the air with disgust, as if he'd touched something radioactive. "Is this what you call cleaning, Maxwell?" hissed the manager. His voice low but laced with venom, designed not to disturb the wealthy patrons, but perfect for destroying his employee. "I pay you to make the place shine, not to spread dirt around." Violet immediately lowered her head. Julian felt a lash across his chest seeing that gesture. The Violet he knew never, under any circumstances, bowed her head to anyone. She was fierce, proud, a woman who wouldn't be trampled. Now her chin touched her chest in an act of absolute submission. I'm sorry, Mr. Vance," Violet replied, her voice trembling, hoarse from dehydration. "I'll wipe it down again, right now. I just felt a bit dizzy, just for a second." "I don't care about your pathetic excuses," Alistair cut her off, approaching her intimidatingly. Violet, with difficulty due to her enormous belly, took a clumsy step back. "You've been dragging yourself around the dining room all week. If you keep moving like a turtle, you're out on the street today." "No, please," she begged, looking up for the first time. Julian's eyes widened at the sight of absolute terror on the face of the woman he loved. "Mr. Vance, please, I need this job. Rent is due Friday and I can't afford the clinic. I swear I'll be faster. Don't fire me. I'm begging you." The sound of Violet's plea cut through Julian's chest like a serrated knife. He felt blood pumping in his ears. The anger he felt towards her just 2 minutes ago was mutating into a dark, primitive, and dangerous instinct. He wanted to murder Alistair Vance with his bare hands. "That bun in the oven isn't my problem, Maxwell," Alistair spat, pointing at the enormous belly under the orange uniform. "I don't give a damn if you're pregnant. No one forced you to open your legs. You're here to work. If you can't keep up because your kid weighs you down, go beg on the street, where you belong. You have 3 minutes to leave this area spotless or grab your rubbish and get out. Understood?" The cruelty of the words echoed in the small area. A thick, silent tear rolled down Violet's cheek, mixing with sweat. She pressed her lips together, holding back sobs, and nodded frantically. "Yes, sir, understood. I'll make it spotless," she mumbled, grabbing the cloth with uncontrollably trembling hands and beginning to rub the wood desperately, bending her body in obvious agony. Alistair smiled with satisfaction, straightening his lapels, turning to leave. But he didn't get far. A hand the size of a dinner plate closed around his neck from behind, grabbing the fabric of his gray suit so hard that his shirt buttons threatened to burst. The manager choked on a muffled gasp as he was violently pulled backwards. He came face to face with Julian Griffin's shadowed face. Julian's eyes were no longer those of a calculating businessman. They were those of a predator, a second away from tearing his prey apart. "Got a problem with her, trash?" Julian growled, his voice resonating in a deep, lethal baritone, loud enough to immediately silence the murmuring of nearby tables. Alistair paled to the color of ash. He knew Julian Griffin. All of Sydney's elite knew the real estate magnate. He was one of the city's most important and feared clients. "Mr. Griffin," stammered the manager, trembling under the grip that threatened to cut off his breath. "I was just correcting staff. I didn't mean to bother you." The sound of the name Griffin had an electric effect 2 meters away. Violet, who was rubbing the table with tear-filled eyes, froze completely. The white cloth slipped from her fingers, falling in slow motion to the floor. Oxygen seemed to be absorbed from the room. Slowly, with absolute terror disfiguring her features, Violet turned her face. Her breathing stopped. Her hands instinctively clutched the sides of her swollen belly, as if trying to protect the baby from the approaching gaze. Julian released Alistair with a brutal shove, causing the manager to stumble and fall to his knees on the marble. But Julian no longer looked at the man on the floor. His eyes were fixed directly on Violet. The silence in the restaurant was sepulchral. The gazes of the millionaires around were fixed on the scene. The tension was so dense it could be cut with a crystal. Julian looked her up and down. The humiliating uniform, the dark circles, the panic in her brown eyes, and finally that enormous 8-month belly. Violet recoiled a step, bumping into a tray of empty glasses a waiter had left nearby. The tray crashed to the floor. The sound of glass shattering into 1,000 pieces broke the silence like a gunshot, but neither of them flinched. They stood face to face, the betrayed millionaire and the shattered ex-wife. "J. Julian," Violet whispered, her lips trembling uncontrollably, recoiling another step, wanting to disappear, to flee, to die, before he asked the one question she had sworn never to answer. Julian took a step towards her, crushing the broken glass with his Italian shoes, his eyes burning with pain and rage. 9 months, Violette." Julian's voice was low, harsh, and echoed in the absolute silence. 9 months since you fled." Julian's gaze dropped to her belly, the calculation shining like a death sentence in his pupils. 8 months pregnant. Violet covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a choked sob, backing away until her back hit the wall. There was no escape. The wall she had built to protect him from the truth had just collapsed before her eyes. The silence in the Golden Wattle was absolute, thick, almost suffocating. The dozens of Millionaire diners, accustomed to complaining if the wine wasn't at the exact temperature, now held their breath. No one moved a muscle. On the marble floor, Alistair, the feared manager, remained on his knees, rubbing his reddened neck, paralyzed by the contained violence emanating from Julian Griffin's navy suit. But Julian saw no one else. The entire world had shrunk to the woman cornered against the wall, Violet, his Violet, or the woman who once was. Julian's brain, a machine trained to devour financial data and detect fraud in seconds, was now working at breakneck speed, but not with bank account numbers, rather with months, with dates, with memories that burned his blood. Exactly 9 months since that rainy afternoon when she threw the wedding rings onto the granite counter of his mansion. 9 months since she looked at him with glacial contempt, claiming he wasn't enough, that she had found a real man, a European businessman, who would give her the world Julian denied her by always working. 9 months since she disappeared without a trace, blocking his calls, erasing herself from the map. And now, in front of him, a belly screaming the anatomical truth. Impossible to hide. 8 months. The exchange of glances was devastating. Julian searched Violet's brown eyes for the cold, calculating woman who had abandoned him but found her not. Instead, he saw only a wounded, terrified animal. Her thin, rough hands, once always adorned with perfect manicures and diamonds, were now red, cracked by cleaning chemicals, and clung to her swollen belly with an instinctive protective force. 8 months. Julian's voice wasn't a shout. It was a hoarse whisper laden with a venom that paralyzed Violet. "You're 8 months pregnant." Violet swallowed. Panic squeezed her chest, cutting off her breath. Her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. She knew Julian was brilliant. She knew he wouldn't take more than 5 seconds to do the maths if she had left 9 months ago, and the baby was 8 months along. Conception occurred exactly in the weeks leading up to the divorce, weeks in which they still shared the same bed. "Julian, please," she begged in a thin voice, pressing herself against the fine wooden wall, as if wanting to merge with it. "Leave. Don't make a scene here." "Leave?" Julian let out a dry laugh, devoid of any humor, a sound that made the nearest waiters tremble. "Don't make a scene? You disappear. You destroy my life. You tell me you're going to Paris with a magnate who will treat you like a queen, and I find you scrubbing grime in Sydney, starving and about to give birth." Julian took a step forward, closing the distance. His imposing figure covered Violet with his shadow. The scent of his expensive cologne, wood, and spices hit Violet, unearthing 1,000 memories that struck her like a sledgehammer to the stomach. "The maths doesn't add up, Violet." Julian raised his voice for the first time, a roar that echoed in the double-height ceiling of the restaurant. 9 months since I saw you, 8 months pregnant. Who is the father?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Alistair, from the floor, tried to intervene, terrified of losing his job or the venue's prestige. "That's Mr. Griffin. If the employee is bothering you, security can remove her through the service door immediately." Julian didn't even look at him. He turned his face barely a millimeter, his dark eyes distilling a homicidal fury. "If you open your mouth again to call her an employee or try to touch her, I swear to God I'll buy this restaurant today just for the pleasure of destroying it with you inside." "Shut up and don't move." Alistair paled and cowered, clamping his mouth shut. Violet seized that second of distraction. The instinct for survival, or rather the instinct to protect the secret that had cost her everything, took hold. She couldn't let him ask questions. She couldn't let him investigate. If Julian discovered the truth, the men who had threatened her would go after him, put him in jail, or worse. With a quick movement, fueled by pure adrenaline, Violet clumsily pushed a chair into the aisle, blocking Julian's path, and ran, or at least tried. Running with the weight of an 8-month pregnancy in a malnourished body was more of a desperate stumble. She spun on her worn rubber heels and launched herself towards the swinging kitchen doors. "Violet!" Julian bellowed, surprise freezing him for a microsecond before his long strides reacted. She pushed open the metallic kitchen doors with both hands. The heat of the ovens, the smell of grease, seared meat, and the shouting of the chefs engulfed her. She entered like an orange hurricane, stumbling among the cooks, knocking over a tray of clean vegetables. "Watch out, Violet," shouted a kitchen assistant, barely dodging her. "Out of the way," was the roar that followed. The swinging doors burst open again violently, hitting the wall. Julian Griffin entered the kitchen, ignoring health and safety regulations, ignoring the chaos he left in his wake. His designer suit didn't fit in that hell of stainless steel and grease, but he advanced like a battle tank. Violet looked back over her shoulder, terror injected into her eyes. She reached the emergency back door, pushed it with her full body weight, and exited into the Sydney night. The clang of the metal door closing echoed against the brick walls. The rear alley of the Golden Wattle was the exact opposite side of the coin. If inside it was all luxury, soft music, and French perfumes, outside it reeked of rotting garbage, moisture retained in the asphalt, and the city's suffocating smog. A flickering bulb cast a sickly yellow light on the industrial rubbish bins. Violet leaned against the cold brick wall, breathing through her mouth in hoarse gasps. Her heart pounded so hard against her ribs, she feared they would break. She clutched her belly with both hands, feeling a sharp pang at the base of her pelvis. The baby moved, kicking strongly, agitated by the level of stress and adrenaline flooding its mother's bloodstream. "Easy, my love, easy," Violet whispered, her voice broken, closing her eyes tightly, praying Julian hadn't followed, praying he would let her go. But fate and Julian Griffin never accepted no for an answer. The heavy metal door burst open with a brutal kick. Julian emerged into the alley. The contrast of the darkness made him pause for a second until his eyes adjusted. And there he saw her, cowering by the rubbish bins, dirty, trembling, wrapped in that cursed orange uniform that churned his stomach with indignation and pain. He walked towards her with slow, heavy, predatory steps. Each step echoed on the wet asphalt. Violet lifted her chin, forcing herself to build the wall of ice that had saved her 9 months ago. She had to lie. She had to be cruel. If she showed weakness, he would dig until he found the truth of why she left him. "Leave, Julian," Violet screamed before he was 2 meters away. "I don't want to see you. Leave me alone." Julian stopped mere centimeters from her. He was so tall that she had to look up. His face was tense, the veins in his neck bulging with contained rage. There was not an ounce of the loving, gentle man who used to make her breakfast on Sundays. In front of her was the shark of Sydney's streets. "I'm not going anywhere, Violet. Not until you tell me what the hell this means." Julian sharply gestured towards the woman's belly. "Explain it to me, because my accountant could do the sums better than this rubbish. You leave saying you hate me, that you have a magnate waiting for you. You leave without asking for alimony, without taking a single cent, supposedly to live in Europe. And 9 months later I find you mopping up vomit in a restaurant in my city, 10 kilos lighter and 8 months pregnant." Violet clenched her fists. Her nails dug into her palms. "It's none of your business. My life isn't yours anymore." "Of course it is," Julian roared, slamming his clenched fist into the brick wall right beside Violet's head. The impact sent small pieces of mortar falling. Violet jumped, startled, but didn't look away. "Look me in the eyes, woman. Tell me the truth. Is that child mine?" The question detonated in the alley. The silence that followed was only interrupted by their agitated breathing and the electric hum of the broken lamp. Julian lowered his gaze to her belly. His breathing became erratic. A mixture of terrified hope and desolate fury crossed his face. If that baby was his, if his own child had been cleaning tables, starving, dragging himself along the floor while he closed Millionaire deals, toasting with champagne, the guilt would destroy him. Violet saw the vulnerability in his eyes. She saw the businessman's armor crack for a second. It broke her soul. She wanted to hug him. She wanted to cry on his chest, staining his expensive suit, and tell him she loved him, that she never stopped loving him, that she sold all her valuables to pay the extortionists who threatened to fabricate evidence to put him in a federal prison. She wanted to tell him the child was his, but the thugs had been clear. "If he finds out, we don't just put him in jail, we kill him in prison. You leave and disappear, and if you talk, the bastard won't be born." Violet swallowed the lump of tears, hardened her jaw, and drew strength from desperation. Her face transformed, adopting a mask of forced, cold, and empty arrogance. "Don't be delusional, Julian," she said, spitting out the words with a contempt that burned her throat. "The child isn't yours, it's his, the man I left you for." Julian felt a bucket of ice water poured down his neck. Physical pain shot through him. His muscles tensed until they ached. "His?" Julian let out a sarcastic, harsh laugh, full of disbelief and resentment. "The European millionaire's? And where is he? Why is a magnate's wife scrubbing Alistair Vance's messes dressed in orange? Where are your luxuries, Violet?" Violet averted her gaze, unable to sustain the lie in front of his penetrating eyes. She looked towards the rubbish. "He abandoned me," she blurted out the lie, her voice trembling but maintaining the character. "It was a mistake. I was stupid. The scoundrel dumped me when I told him I was pregnant. He cancelled my cards and left me stranded. I had to come back to Sydney. I had to find any work to avoid starving." Julian processed every word. His eyes scanned Violet's face like a lie detector. He observed her cracked lip from dehydration. He observed the stoop of her shoulders. He observed the shame on her face. "So that's it," Julian mumbled, stepping back half a pace as if her mere proximity contaminated him. "You traded me for a fantasy. You went off to sleep with an idiot for money, and when he left you with the problem in your belly, you ended up sweeping misery. Karma's a ruthless bitch, isn't it, Violet?" Julian's words were like knives straight to her heart. Violet felt herself drowning, but nodded slowly, accepting the punishment, accepting the hatred in the eyes of the man for whom she was sacrificing her life. "Yes, Julian," she whispered, a treacherous tear finally escaping and rolling down her dirty cheek. "I'm stupid. You're right. You've seen how miserable I am. You've had your revenge. Now, please, leave. Let me keep working so I can buy nappies for my child." Julian looked at her for a long second. The hatred was evident, yes, but Julian Griffin's intelligence wasn't extinguished by anger. There was something in Violet's voice. There was something in the way she clenched her teeth, in the way her body trembled not from fear, but from physical pain. The pieces didn't quite fit. The selfish and ruthless woman she described wouldn't beg for forgiveness with her eyes while spitting venom with her mouth, but pride is a blind monster. Julian straightened his posture, adjusted his lapels with a calculating gesture, putting his unbreakable steel armor back on. His face became an unexpressive, lethal mask. "I pity you, Violet," he said, his voice cold as ice. "I hope minimum wage covers your pride." Without another word, Julian Griffin turned and walked back to the restaurant's rear door. He opened it forcefully, entered the kitchen, and let the metal clang shut behind him, leaving Violet alone in the darkness of the alley. The instant he disappeared, Violet's knees gave way. She collapsed onto the dirty asphalt, clutching her belly tightly, and burst into uncontrollable, silent, heart-wrenching sobs, drowning in her own pain amidst the rubbish. She had saved Julian once more. But inside, Julian didn't walk towards the exit door. He walked directly to his table. He took out his phone and dialed a number. His instinct burned like a deafening alarm. Violet's story was perfect, too perfect to be true, and he was going to discover the truth, no matter the cost. Julian Griffin crossed the swinging kitchen doors in reverse, leaving behind the hell of heat and pans to re-enter the cool, perfumed air of the Golden Wattle. His face was a mask carved from granite. No one in the luxurious dining room dared to look him directly in the eyes, but everyone felt the lethal vibration emanating from his navy suit. A few meters away, next to the service station, Alistair Vance, the general manager, stood stiff as a board, sweating cold and wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He trembled. He knew he had crossed a line that could cost him his career. Julian ignored Alistair, as if he were a cockroach crushed on the marble, and walked with long, decisive strides to the central table. The three real estate executives, who had been petrified for 10 minutes, straightened up immediately upon his arrival. The lead lawyer, a gray-haired man in a gray suit, forced a nervous smile and pushed the ink-stained contract towards the center of the glass table. "Julian, glad you're back," the lawyer said, clearing his throat, pretending the scene of physical violence and public humiliation he had just witnessed had never occurred. "I suppose it was a misunderstanding with staff. Let's continue. Here's the pen. Only your signature is needed to close the acquisition of the Golden Wattle for the agreed $40 million. Julian remained standing in front of the oak chair. He didn't take the solid gold Mont Blanc pen. He didn't even glance at the paper. His eyes, dark and turbulent, swept over the restaurant's ostentatious ceiling, the crystal lamps, the mahogany walls, and finally fixed on the service door through which Violet had fled. That image stole his breath. His ex-wife, the haughty woman who demanded hothouse roses every Friday, hidden among the rubbish in an alley, terrified, protecting an 8-month belly. Something was disgustingly wrong with that entire equation. "The deal is off," Julian stated. His voice was low, flat, cutting the air like a guillotine. The 3 men at the table widened their eyes. The gray-haired lawyer jumped to his feet, paling. "What, Julian? For God's sake, we've been negotiating this for 3 months. The price is a bargain. The market is at its peak. You can't back out now over an altercation with a waitress. We'll give you an additional discount. How about it? 5% less for the trouble." Julian placed both hands on the glass table and leaned his large frame towards the executives. The silent threat in his posture made the 3 men instinctively recoil in their chairs. "You're not listening," Julian said, enunciating each syllable with chilling slowness. "I don't want the restaurant. I'm no longer interested in buying the commercial premises." He paused, letting panic settle on the sellers' faces before delivering the final blow. "I want the entire building." The silence at the table was absolute. The lawyer blinked, unable to process the twist. "The commercial tower, Julian, that's not for sale, and even if it were, we're talking over $200 million AUD. The owners won't give up the main property." "Everything has a price," Julian interjected, straightening up and buttoning his jacket with a crisp movement. "Offer them. Lambausche. M. Ifa. Isiklawans. L. UV. Ke. Undrego. Now. Bawo. Mau. N. The Marshly Betraya. C. A use. A bond problem marks and data flake. Isa Tuklina. H. I. M. Isa Anytena. One to the Slive. One topo. And to the Slive. The now day. Ed Klamba. Izanka. 18. And Anka. 18. Iwa. Eva. Eliza. Wigan. And the Lash. Abe. And the Skay. Or. Adam. And. UBNs. F. Man. Is Krada. F. Yes as life turned. Dam life turned. Yes, explained. Are. W. I furry. Deed. H. No. I minus Su drive. And Ine de C. And the Su drive. N. Arshese. H. Anika fire. A 90 for you and minor. Anika fire. US scan. Namavare. R. Misa. SE. A. C. L. O. Vericia. And S. Isa. Nauda. These are ways. HDA. Zav. Isa. And Isa. Tak. Venstov. It is a difference of D-I-E. Inde. L. Distiso. Owe. Endesema. I. G. Vi for PC sa. G for PC sa. Jish. Dia. B. Inaibasa. Baziona. Biganderingsof. Inaibasa. F. Ovistia. R. E. Encom. Iklidat. M. Ikaden Dallas. Ariso. N. E. I. B. G. H. Ifan. And Dafina. 250 million. Cash. Immediate transfer within 4 hours. Close the deal tonight before midnight. 250 million? That's insane, Julian. You're brutally overpaying. No analyst would approve of this whim. Why the hell do you want the entire building? Julian turned his head slightly and fixed his killer gaze directly on Alistair Vance, who stood petrified in the distance, half listening to the conversation. Because as the owner of the restaurant, I'm just an investor. As the owner of the building, I'm God. On this piece of land, Julian raised his voice enough for the manager to hear him. And my first divine order will be that the Golden Wattle has a new proprietor. A new contract will be drafted, and the first non-negotiable clause demands the immediate dismissal of Alistair Vance, without severance, without a letter of recommendation. And if he dares to sue, I'll use my entire corporate legal team to ensure he never gets another job, not even cleaning toilets at a petrol station. Was I clear? The lawyer swallowed hard, nodding frantically, terrified by the display of pure, unhinged power Julian had just unleashed. Crystal clear, Julian. I'll draft the offer immediately. Julian turned and walked towards the main exit. As he moved between the tables, he took out his mobile phone and dialed the only number that mattered to him at that moment. It wasn't his assistant's or his bank's. It was Rhys Jones, his head of security and private investigator, a former military intelligence specialist who could find a ghost at the bottom of the sea if paid enough. "Jones," came the reply on the second ring. "Reese, drop whatever you're doing. I need you to deploy all your men right now," Julian ordered, pushing open the restaurant's heavy glass doors and stepping out into the warm Sydney night. "I want a full report on Violet Maxwell, my ex-wife." "Sir, I thought that matter was closed 9 months ago when she went to Paris." "She never made it to Paris, Reese. I just saw her. She's here in Sydney. She's working as a cleaner and she's 8 months pregnant." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Reese, accustomed to extreme situations, immediately understood the gravity of the matter from the fractured tone in his boss's voice. "Understood, sir." "What perimeter am I looking for?" "Everything," Julian growled, climbing into the back of his armored SUV as his chauffeur closed the door. "I want her bank accounts. I want medical records from public and private hospitals. I want security footage from ATMs. I want to know where she sleeps, what she eats, who she talks to, and what the hell she's done every single damn day since she walked out of my mansion 9 months ago. I want to know who the lover who supposedly got her pregnant is, or if he ever even existed. That requires hacking into closed systems, boss. It's expensive and time-consuming." "I don't give a damn about the cost," Julian shouted, slamming his clenched fist against the back of the passenger seat, making the SUV's interior tremble. "I pay you to bring me truths, not excuses. I want her stripped bare on paper, and I want that damn file on my desk before dawn. If you don't have it by 6 a.m., you're fired." "Yes, sir. On it." Julian ended the call and threw his phone onto the leather seat beside him. He covered his face with both hands, rubbing his eyes in desperation. The image of Violet in the alley, trembling, humiliated, rubbing her belly with her cracked hands, replayed in his mind like a looping horror film. "I pity you," he had told her. Julian clenched his teeth until his jaw ached. If the child was that stupid Millionaire's, he would personally see them both ruined. But if the numbers added up, if that 8-month belly was the result of their last nights together, Julian knew in that instant that the world was going to burn. The discovery of the abyss. It was 4:15 a.m. The main office of Griffin Real Estate, on the 40th floor of one of Sydney's tallest towers, was plunged in gloom. Only Julian's desk lamp cast a cone of cold light onto the immense tempered glass table. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city sleeping, a carpet of orange and white lights that seemed infinite. Julian hadn't taken off his suit. He had been pacing in circles for hours like a caged lion, drinking black coffee that already tasted acidic in his empty stomach. He couldn't close his eyes without seeing Violet's terrified gaze. The sound of the electronic door opening broke the silence of the early morning. Reese entered. He wore a dark leather jacket, and his face, hardened by years in the military, looked unusually pale and tense. In his hands, he carried a thick, bulging manila envelope that seemed to weigh a ton. Julian stopped dead. His breathing quickened. "Tell me you have it, Reese." Reese advanced to the desk and dropped the envelope onto the glass with a dry, heavy, definitive thud. He didn't look Julian in the eyes. "I have it, sir. We tracked everything. We cross-referenced ATO data, Centerlink records, city CCTV cameras, and hacked into her cancelled credit card history. I have everything." Julian approached the desk, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the envelope. "Who's the bloke?" he asked in a hoarse voice, refusing to open the package. "Who's the European? Where's the coward hiding who left her like this?" Reese swallowed and crossed his hands behind his back in a resting position, adopting a strictly professional tone to soften the blow. "There's no European, Mr. Griffin. There never was any magnate. We checked migration databases and global airline records. Violet Maxwell hasn't left Sydney in the last 9 months. She didn't even set foot in an airport. The story of the millionaire lover in Paris was a fabricated lie." Julian felt the air snatched from his lungs. His fingers brushed the edge of the envelope. "A lie," he whispered, feeling a sharp buzzing in his ears. "Then why did she leave me? Why did she leave the house screaming that she hated me? Open the envelope, boss. You won't like the answers." Julian tore the manila paper violently. A stack of photographs, printed in color, and dozens of financial documents fell scattered over the illuminated glass. The first photograph hit Julian directly in the chest. It showed Violet in an old, worn jumper, walking on a broken footpath in a rundown Sydney suburb. She carried plastic supermarket bags, and her belly was already very evident. In the second photo, Violet was climbing a rusty spiral staircase, clinging to the metal railing with an expression of absolute exhaustion. Those are captures from neighborhood security cameras from 2 weeks ago, Reese explained, pointing at the image. That's her current address. She lives in a 12 SQM tin and concrete rooftop room. The bathroom is shared with 4 other tenants. She pays $1,500 AUD rent a month and is 2 months overdue. My God, Julian exclaimed, taking a step back, clutching his chest as if he'd been shot. She was my wife. She owned all of this. Why is she living in misery? Why didn't she withdraw money from their joint accounts before the divorce? I never blocked her cards until she disappeared. Reese slid a bank statement onto the glass, pushing it towards Julian. The numbers were highlighted in fluorescent yellow marker. Sir, she emptied her personal accounts 3 days before filing for divorce. She sold her Mercedes. She pawned all her jewelry, including the 5-carat engagement ring you gave her. She sold off her designer bags and branded clothing to pawn shops below their real value. She raised almost. Sir, L. I wait. My business ate. Be my business. L. I like. Intant facion affair. An mistu. En body you. A pravity from the borfolen. In this. A pravity from the. You. Friend. De Lassington de C. Tom. Dumandi. Enda lifers. Enda lifers. C. Sia. A. Skanstade shing. Iastade. Very jest. H. Ias. N. L. Iva Bayelema. Hiwale Yelema. Bayelema. Endend. Asivan. Endend. Thence private alike and Terry. Face to the safe. For the safe. Face to the safe. The sun. And the air. H. Isayuna. Besayuna. Isayuna. N12. ND9. Tsishua. He. Denk. And the Sida. Die. Azain de Lifa. And Era. En Flina. J. In Bidao. Wujami. More. L. I. Anmande. N. Isas. B. R. Explensa. Creasing. With a blaffor. Infor. Maikulina. Ikeli. N. C. Isalasa. Eli. L. Isa. Kantam. Isa. B. Must. Yefri. Even dem. One hudam sing. Ifti. Adedalka. Aliksta. Age. Isa. Yesa. Iftalem. Isia. And. If you know too. Omear tointoi. Enan none. C. E centari. E state of fivel. And the festaus. L. M. Eider. Difra. H. Esvander. M. Agan toshabato. Wano BC. D. On the sterala. Van Edode 8. N. Ifli wonderframt. Lasi. Isto. Asgoma. Aso. Asgoma. Yeskazis. Iasel. Ibaipo. DSL. Abad. Thereafter be and so. And the video be and so. And the video. Indian sef. Andifa. Igarastat. 4 million dinkashin less than 7, 2 hours. Julian's brain collapsed. The financial maths madeno sense. 4 million AUD, and she's living in a starving tin rooftop room? That's impossible. What did she spend the money on? Drugs? Gambling? Reese shook his head slowly, and the compassion in his hard military eyes was what truly terrified Julian. She didn't spend it, sir. She transferred it. Every last cent. Reese pointed to a sheet of encrypted electronic transfers his team had managed to decrypt that same morning. A single deposit of $3.9 million AUD to a ghost account in the Cayman Islands appears. We traced the parent account using federal intelligence contacts. That offshore account doesn't belong to any lover, Mr. Griffin. It belongs to the proxies of Arthur Delaney and Fraser Reynolds. The names of the two men detonated in Julian's head like an atomic bomb. Arthur and Fraser, his former majority partners, the men Julian had discovered committing massive fraud in the construction company a year ago. Julian had expelled them from the company in a brutal board meeting, stripping them of their percentage and threatening to send them to a maximum security prison if they ever came near his empire again. What does Violette have to do with Arthur and Fraser? Julian Fedlantira. Julian felt the room spinning, the cold light from the lamp burning his eyes. "We reviewed security cameras around your mansion from 9 months ago, exactly 2 days before Miss Violet filed for divorce. Do you recall being on a business trip in New York that week?" Julian nodded mechanically. Cold sweat began to bead on his forehead. Reese pulled out one last photograph from the bottom of the envelope. It was dark, grainy, taken by a street camera, but the image was unmistakable. It showed the wrought iron entrance to the Griffin mansion, and there, standing in front of the gate, intercepting Violet, who had just stepped out of her car, were Arthur and Fraser, flanked by 2 armed men. "They intercepted her when she was alone, sir," Reese said, his voice grave and somber. "According to underworld informants I contacted an hour ago, Arthur and Fraser possessed enough falsified documents and bought witnesses to incriminate you for the fraud they committed. The false evidence was perfect, Julian. If they presented it to a federal judge, you wouldn't just lose the company. You would spend 20 years in a maximum security prison." Julian's knees buckled. He had to grasp the edge of the glass desk to keep from falling to the floor. Air wouldn't enter his lungs. "They extorted Violet," Reese continued relentlessly, uncovering the pit of horror. "They demanded $4 million AUD in cash to hand over the only copy of that false evidence and leave you alone. And they set one more condition. She had to divorce you and disappear. If you tried to seek out the extortionists, or if she told you a single word of the blackmail, they would kill you and her." The silence that filled the 40th floor office was deafening. Julian looked down at the scattered photos. Violet walking in the torn jumper. Violet sleeping on a mattress on the floor. Violet cleaning tables at the Golden Wattle for tips and to pay $1,500 AUD rent. She hadn't betrayed him. She hadn't left with another man. She had abandoned him to save his life and his empire. She had taken on the role of the cruel villain, enduring his hatred and resentment for 9 months because it was the only way to protect him. She sold her last shred of dignity to pay the ransom for Julian's freedom. And the baby. Oh God, the baby. Julian covered his mouth with his hand, stifling a guttural sob, a sound that seemed torn from the depths of his soul. Hot, furious tears streamed from his dark eyes, falling onto the glass desk and staining the financial documents. If there was no European lover, if she had never been with another man, if the 9 months perfectly coincided with the last week they slept together before she signed the divorce papers, the baby. Julian's voice broke into 1,000 pieces, drowning in tears. He fell to his knees on the gray carpet of his luxury office, clutching his chest, shattered by the level of sacrifice his wife had made. "The baby is mine. That child is mine." The most powerful man in the city, the ruthless businessman who felt no pity for anyone, collapsed to the floor, crying like a child as he realized what he had done. He had humiliated the mother of his child. He had left her alone in a dark alley, rubbing her tired belly while he looked at her with disgust. Reese stepped forward, kneeling beside him. "Mr. Griffin, get up. We have a much worse problem." Julian looked up, his eyes red and face bathed in tears. What could be worse than this nightmare? Reese handed him one last paper, a medical report from a community clinic. "When we tracked her medical visits, we discovered this. Miss Maxwell didn't go to work at the Golden Wattle today. Her shift supervisor sent her to the public clinic 3 hours ago. Her severe malnutrition and the extreme stress she was subjected to last night caused life-threatening complications. Julian, she has severe preeclampsia." Julian felt the world stop completely. "She's in the emergency room at the Royal North Shore Hospital, and the doctors say she and the baby won't make it through the night." Julian Griffin didn't remember standing up. He didn't remember crossing the glass doors of his corporate office, nor the dizzying descent in the private elevator from the 40th floor. His mind had fractured, leaving only space for a primitive, desperate instinct to reach her. The elevator doors opened in the underground car park. "The keys! Give me the damn keys!" Julian roared, snatching the armored SUV's remote from his chauffeur, who recoiled in fear against the concrete wall. Reese ran behind him, getting into the passenger seat, just as the SUV's V8 engine roared with deafening ferocity. The tires shrieked against the polished pavement, leaving a trail of black smoke and burnt rubber as Julian sped towards the exit ramp. The speedometer needle shot up. It was 4:32 a.m. Sydney's streets were empty, shrouded in the gray mist of dawn. Julian drove like a man possessed, running red lights, crossing main avenues at over 160 kilometers per hour. His hands squeezed the leather-wrapped steering wheel so hard, his knuckles seemed about to burst through his skin. In his head, the words from the previous night repeated like relentless torture. I pity you, Violet. I hope minimum wage covers your pride." Julian let out a choked cry, a guttural sound that echoed inside the luxurious cabin. He slammed his clenched fist against his chest, trying to tear out the physical pain crushing his lungs. "It was me, Reese," Julian cried, his voice torn by tears. "It was me who pushed her to the limit. Yesterday I cornered her in that alley. I yelled that she was trash. I let that imbecile manager humiliate her in front of me. She was saving my life, and I was destroying hers." Reese, clinging to the safety handle due to the suicidal speed of the vehicle, pulled out his phone. "Sir, focus on the road. I've already contacted the head of surgery at North Shore Private Hospital. I have 3 private specialists en route to the Royal North Shore. They have orders to transfer her to the best intensive care suite in the country as soon as we arrive. Money will not be an issue." "I don't give a damn about money," Julian roared, his eyes bloodshot, tears blurring his vision. "If she dies, Reese, if my son isn't born, I'll burn this entire city down, starting with myself." In the distance, the emergency lights of the Royal North Shore Hospital cut through the darkness. It was a huge gray building, worn by time and lack of budget, a place saturated with pain and deficiencies, the exact opposite of the world of marble and gold, in which Julian had lived while his pregnant wife cleaned tables to survive. Julian braked the SUV sharply, invading the ambulance lane, and got out before the engine completely died. He ran towards the emergency doors. The impact of reality inside the hospital was like being hit in the stomach with a baseball bat. The waiting room was a suffocating chaos. Dozens of people slept on hard plastic chairs, women crying in corners, the smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with sweat and illness. Fluorescent lights flickered, casting a deathly pallor on the peeling walls. Julian strode through the room, pushing people aside without a second thought. His imposing figure in the designer navy suit, now wrinkled and tireless, violently clashed with the misery of the place. He reached the reception counter, a dirty, bulletproof glass screen behind which an exhausted nurse typed on an old computer. "Violet Maxwell," Julian demanded, slamming his open palm on the glass. "Where is she?" "She was admitted 3 hours ago." The nurse looked up, irritated. "Sir, please be quiet. This is a hospital. You need to take a number and wait." "I won't wait a damn second," Julian roared, his voice echoing throughout the entire emergency room, making the security guards at the door alert. "I am Julian Griffin. I will buy this entire hospital and fire you and every single damn executive if you don't tell me which bed my wife is in within the next 5 seconds. Reese arrived just behind, flashing his military ID and intervening before the guards drew their batons. "It's a critical emergency, miss. Patient with severe preeclampsia. Violet Maxwell, please." The nurse paled at the men's tone and quickly checked the screen. "Shock trauma area at the end of the corridor, past the red doors, but you can't go in there. It's restricted access." Julian didn't wait for her to finish the sentence. He ran towards the red double doors, pushing them open with both arms. The shock trauma area was an inferno of movement, machines beeping frantically, nurses rushing with IV bags, doctors shouting orders. And there, in bed number 4, separated only by a soiled fabric curtain, he found her. Julian's world stopped. Oxygen left the room. Violet lay on the white sheets, pale as marble. Her lips, once full and rosy, now had a bluish, cracked tone. She had oxygen tubes in her nose and 3 intravenous lines jabbed into her thin, bruised arms. The disgusting orange cleaning uniform had been cut with scissors to place the monitors, exposing her enormous 8-month belly. But what definitively broke Julian's soul wasn't the tubes or the machines. It was seeing her hands. Violet's hands, falling inertly at the sides of the bed, were covered in sores, cuts, and chemical burns from using industrial bleaches without protective gloves. The man who controlled the financial destiny of half the country fell to his knees beside the cheap metal bed. "My love," Julian whispered, his voice broken, choking on his own tears. "Violet, my God, what did they do to you? What did I let them do to you?" He took one of those abused hands, bringing it to his lips and kissing every scar, every burn, bathing her skin with fervent tears. Forgive me, my life. Please don't leave me. I beg you, don't leave me." The heart monitor alarms above the bed began to beep with a sharp, fast, terrifying cadence. The green line rose and fell erratically. "Sir, you have to leave here right now," shouted a nurse, trying to pull Julian away from the stretcher. "I won't let go," Julian roared, clinging to his wife's hand as if it were a lifeline in the middle of the ocean. A young doctor with a crumpled gown, deep dark circles under his eyes, and a face hardened by 1,000 lost battles in the emergency room, pushed his way through the curtains. It was Doctor. Andrews, the head of the on-call team. Clear the area. Prepare 100 milligrams of IV labetalol. Her blood pressure is already 190/120. The doctor ordered, checking the monitor screen before fixing his furious eyes on Julian. Who the hell are you and what are you doing in my trauma bay? Security. Get him out of here. Reese intercepted the guards at the curtain entrance, forming an impassable wall with his body. Julian slowly stood up, without releasing Violet's hand. His dark eyes, flooded with tears, reflected the ferocity of a wounded lion. I am Julian Griffin. She is my wife, and it is my child in her womb. Doctor. Andrews stopped dead, looked at Julian's $1,000 suit, looked at his Swiss watch, and then looked at the malnourished, dirty, and broken patient wearing a cheap janitor's uniform. Indignation crossed the doctor's face like lightning. The husband. The doctor let out a bitter, contemptuous laugh, taking a step towards Julian until he was centimeters from his face. He didn't care about the money or the magnate's aura of power. In his emergency room, he was the ultimate authority. Where the hell were you for the last 8 months, Mr. Griffin? The blow of the question hit Julian full in the face. He wanted to answer, he wanted to explain the deception, the extortion by his partners, the damned pride that had blinded him. But the words died in his throat. Everything sounded like empty excuses in front of his agonizing wife's body. I was an idiot, Julian managed to articulate, his voice broken by absolute repentance. I was blind, but I'm here now. I have the 3 best specialists from North Shore Private Hospital waiting outside. I demand she be transferred immediately. I've already ordered a medical helicopter. I'm taking her to private intensive care. Doctor. Andrews shook his head, his expression turning sombre, almost ominous. Put your wallet away, Mr. Griffin. You can't transfer her anywhere. If I move her from this bed, if I put her in an ambulance or a helicopter, your wife will go into cardiac arrest before she reaches the car park, and the baby will suffocate in minutes. You're staying here. Julian felt his blood run cold. Raw, suffocating panic completely paralyzed him. What's wrong with her? Julian whispered, terror disfiguring his features. Tell me exactly what's wrong and how I fix it, doctor. Andrews picked up a gray aluminium folder from the foot of the bed and threw it at Julian's chest. Julian caught it by instinct. Read it yourself, since you seem to have all the answers, the doctor spat, adjusting Violet's oxygen mask. It's not just preeclampsia, Griffin. Your wife is dying from chronic exhaustion and severe malnutrition. Her hemoglobin level is 7. She's anemic. This woman's body has been consuming itself to keep the baby alive. Julian opened the folder. The medical numbers danced before his eyes, but the paramedics' marginal notes from when they picked her up at the restaurant were daggers straight to his heart. Patient found unconscious. 1-4. Hour daily standing work shift. Minimal caloric intake in recent months. Severe post-traumatic stress. I checked her belongings looking for an emergency contact, the doctor continued, pointing to a cheap torn fabric bag in the corner of the room. She didn't have a single cent to buy a bottle of water, Mr. Griffin, but she had her pawn shop receipts. She's been pawning even her shoes to pay for consultations at a local clinic, ensuring the baby received the vitamins she wasn't consuming. Julian awkwardly walked to the plastic chair, took Violet's old fabric bag, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside, there was no designer makeup or gold cards. There was a mended jumper, an empty Tupperware with remnants of white rice, 3 crumpled pawn receipts, and in a protective plastic envelope, perfectly cared for, unlike the rest of her belongings, a black and white ultrasound. Julian took out the image. It was a perfect profile, the small nose, the forehead, the miracle of life breaking through the hell she had endured in solitude. On the bottom edge, in Violet's cursive handwriting, a phrase was written in blue ink. So your daddy is safe, my love. Julian's crying erupted uncontrollably, shattering any facade of a tough man he had left. He collapsed onto the bed, hugging Violet's swollen belly, staining the white sheet with his tears of agony. Wake up, please, Violet, wake up, Julian cried, caressing his wife's cold face. I know everything now. I know what you did for me. I know you sold your life to save me from those bastards. Don't die, for God's sake. Don't leave this empty empire without you. Dr. Andrews observed him, his anger slowly dissolving at the raw intensity of the magnate's grief, understanding that the story behind that tragedy was far darker than simple abandonment. Mr. Griffin, the doctor said, his voice lowering, adopting a cold clinical urgency. Her blood pressure isn't yielding. Violet's kidneys are starting to fail from the preeclampsia. Julian lifted his face, his eyes swollen. What does that mean? The doctor looked at the monitors, then at Violet's belly. It means your wife's body can no longer sustain the pregnancy. The extreme stress she suffered last night was the final trigger. The placenta is detaching. The sharp, continuous sound of the fetal monitor began to beep in the small room, filling the space with the warning of imminent death. The baby's heart rate was drastically dropping. "Code red in room 4!" Dr. Andrews shouted towards the hallway, his voice cutting the air with the authority of controlled panic. "Stop operating room 2! Call neonatology immediately!" The swinging doors burst open. 4 nurses ran in, releasing the brakes on Violet's stretcher. "Where are you taking her?" Julian blocked their path, terrified, refusing to let go of her hand. "To the operating room, Griffin," the doctor shouted, pushing him aside. "We have to get that child out in the next 10 minutes or they'll both die on this stretcher. Quick, push." Julian ran alongside the stretcher down the long corridor illuminated by white fluorescent lights. The wheels screeched against the linoleum floor. Violet remained unconscious, her head swaying with the movement, her breathing shallow and erratic. "I love you. I love you with my whole life." "Hold on, my love," Julian whispered into her ear, running beside her until they reached the heavy metal doors of the surgical area. "This far, Mr. Griffin." A robust security guard blocked his path with both arms. The double doors slammed shut. Through the small glass of the door, Julian watched Violet's stretcher disappear under the powerful operating room lights. He stood there in the empty corridor, his hands stained with his wife's cold sweat, his son's ultrasound crumpled in his fist, and his soul hanging by a thread. The man who yesterday believed he controlled everything, today could only beg destiny on his knees for a chance to redeem himself. The corridor outside the operating rooms was an endless tunnel of white, cold, aseptic light. Julian Griffin, the man who made the country's most ruthless boardrooms tremble, sat on the linoleum floor with his back against the wall, staring intently at his own hands. They were stained with blood, Violet's blood. The clock hanging above the double metal doors showed 5:47 a.m. He had endured an hour and 15 minutes of pure agony. Every second the red surgery in progress light remained on. He felt a hydraulic press crushing his ribs. Reese, standing stoically a couple of meters away, maintained guard, rejecting urgent calls from the company. Nothing mattered. Julian's real estate empire could burn to the ground at that very instant, and he wouldn't care at all. The sepulchral silence of the corridor was torn by the sound of hurried footsteps and someone's agitated breathing. The far doors burst open. A robust woman in her 50s crossed the threshold. She wore her street clothes ill-fittingly over her golden wattle uniform. Her face was drenched in sweat and tears. It was Carol, Violet's fellow waitress, the only person who had shown her an ounce of humanity in that hellish restaurant. "Violet! Where's Violet Maxwell?" Carol cried, her voice echoing off the sterile walls, searching desperately for a nurse. "They called me from the night shift. They said she was brought in code red." Reese stepped forward to intercept her, by security protocol, but Julian raised a trembling hand from the floor, silently ordering him to let her pass. Julian recognized the woman. He had seen her out of the corner of his eye last night, watching terrified from the kitchen as Alistair humiliated his ex-wife. Carol stopped dead upon seeing the magnate sprawled on the hospital floor. Her gaze shifted from absolute surprise to a simmering, deep, visceral hatred. She didn't care about Julian's expensive suit, nor the giant bodyguard's presence. She advanced until she stood before him, pointing a trembling finger. "You!" Carol spat with a contempt that made Julian look up. "You're the scoundrel from last night, the $2,000 monster. You came to finish the job. You came to see if the humiliation you put her through last night finally killed her." Julian swallowed. The lump in his throat was so large it almost prevented him from breathing. He slowly stood up, leaning against the wall. He didn't defend himself. He didn't raise his voice. His bloodshot eyes and face distorted by pain took Carol by surprise, but the woman didn't back down. "I'm her husband," Julian said, his voice reduced to a hoarse, fractured whisper. "I'm the baby's father." Carol's eyes widened immensely. The impact of the revelation seemed to paralyze her for a second. Then she let out a bitter, dry laugh, full of venom. "Her husband?" Carol closed the distance, fixing her eyes on Julian's. "Where the hell was the husband when that girl cried until she vomited in the restaurant bathroom because she couldn't even afford a Panadol? Where was the father of the year when she ate scraps from customers' plates because she hadn't eaten for 3 days to pay for the clinic?" Every word from Carol was a point-blank shot straight to Julian's chest. He already knew the cold facts thanks to Reese. He knew about the extortion by his former partners. He knew about the $4 million AUD transferred to the Cayman Islands. He knew about the death threat that forced her to pretend she didn't love him. But the rawness of what Violet had lived through day after day, the physical reality of her sacrifice, was tearing him apart alive. I didn't know, Julian whispered, closing his eyes tightly, letting the tears flow again. She lied to protect me. I thought she had abandoned me for someone else. Of course she protected you, you blind fool. Carol burst out, hitting Julian's chest with both hands, an act for which Reese would have broken necks in any other circumstance. But Julian let himself be hit, receiving the punishment he felt he deserved. That girl came asking for work 8 months ago, trembling like a leaf. She was terrified that men in black suits would find her. She hid every time a luxury car passed down the avenue. She sold her coats in the middle of December to buy cheap blankets, and all the time, all the damn time, she stroked her belly and whispered to her baby that everything would be all right, that the sacrifice was worth it because his daddy was safe. Julian covered his face with his hands, sobbing uncontrollably, his shoulders trembling violently. I lent her money for bus fares, Carol continued, her own voice breaking into tears. I begged her to rest, not to carry the heavy trays, but she said she couldn't, that if she was kicked out of that rooftop room, the baby would be born on the street. And yesterday when you appeared, I saw her soul drop to the floor. You were the hero of her stories, the man she was starving herself for. And you looked at her with disgust. You let Alistair treat her like rubbish. Enough, Julian pleaded, falling to his knees again, shattered into 1,000 pieces, his forehead touching the cold hospital floor. Please, enough. I was an idiot. I was a coward, blinded by pride. I would give my entire life at this damn instant to be on that operating table instead of her. Carol lowered her gaze to the most powerful man in the city, reduced to ashes by the weight of his own arrogance. The woman's fury slowly transformed into deep pity. She half knelt and placed a hand on his shoulder. Well, pray to God she's stronger than your pride, Mr. Griffin, Carol whispered harshly. Because last night, after you left, I found her lying in the rubbish alley. She was losing blood. She told me she couldn't take it anymore. She told me, at least he hates me enough now never to look for me again. He's safe now. The metallic sound of the double doors opening interrupted her sentence. The red surgery light went out. Julian sprang from the floor, wiping his tear-stained face, his breathing completely arrested. Dr. Andrews emerged from the operating theater. His green gown was stained with dark blood. He removed his surgical mask, revealing a face gaunt from exhaustion, drenched in sweat. He sighed deeply and looked at Julian. Doctor? Julian barely managed to utter the word, absolute terror chilling his blood. The doctor nodded slowly. We lost her twice on the table. We had to use the defibrillator. The doctor paused, measuring his words in front of the magnate, on the verge of collapse. But your wife has the survival instinct of a wild animal defending its young. She survived the emergency C-section, and we managed to stop the internal bleeding. Julian let out a choked cry, leaning against the wall, feeling his soul return to his body. Carol covered her mouth, breaking into tears of relief. And my son? Julian asked, his heart pounding 1,000 beats per hour. The baby is alive. It's a boy, the doctor replied, managing a faint, compassionate smile. Premature, underweight, and with severe respiratory difficulties. He's just been intubated and transferred to the neonatal intensive care unit in an incubator. The battle has just begun for him. But he's breathing, Mr. Griffin. Your wife, against all medical and human odds, managed to keep him alive long enough. I want to see her. I need to see her right now, Julian demanded, desperation, injecting him with new energy. She's in the post-operative recovery room. She's barely regaining consciousness from the anesthesia, the doctor warned. She's extremely weak. A strong shock or a peak of stress right now could cause a heart attack. Go in alone, and for God's sake, try not to upset her. Julian nodded frantically, leaving Carol weeping in Reese's embrace, gently pushed open the doors of the sterilized corridor and walked towards the room at the end. He was going to get his family back. The recovery room was dimly lit. The only sound was the constant, rhythmic, miraculous beep of the heart monitor. It smelled of iodine, strong disinfectant, and freshly washed sheets. Julian stopped at the threshold, feeling the air thicken. Violet was in the central bed. She looked like a broken porcelain doll. Her skin had a translucent pallor. Her hair was matted to her forehead with cold sweat, and her arms, bruised from the intravenous lines of the blood transfusion, rested inertly on the white covers. The immense swelling of her belly had disappeared, leaving a bandaged flatness that evidenced the brutal procedure she had just endured. Julian advanced slowly, terrified that the sound of his shoes would break the fragile bubble of life that kept his wife breathing. He stopped beside the metal bed rail. He observed the face he had loved every day of his adult life, the face he had hated for 9 months because of a lie fabricated to save his life. The level of devotion this woman had shown him was something he, with all his power and money, could never repay in 1,000 lifetimes. Slowly, as if her eyelids weighed tons of lead, Violet began to react. Her eyelashes trembled, her brown eyes opened disoriented, clouded by narcotics, trying to focus on the gray ceiling of the room. Her gaze slowly lowered and met the figure in the navy suit standing beside her bed. Violet's entire body tensed abruptly. Terror returned to her eyes with the force of a tsunami. The heart rate monitor began to accelerate its beeping drastically. Violette tried to sit up, ignoring the sharp, tearing pain of the C-section stitches in her abdomen. "No, no," Violet whispered, her voice sounding like sandpaper, weakly raising a hand to push Julian's chest. "Julian, leave. Get out of here." "Quiet, my love, quiet, don't move." Julian held her by the shoulders with extreme delicacy, gently coaxing her back onto the pillows. "You don't understand," Violet sobbed, breathing agitatedly, tears of pure panic overflowing down her pale cheeks. "They'll see you. If they know you're with me, if they suspect you found something out, they'll put you in jail. They have proof, Julian. They'll destroy you. They'll kill you. Please, get out. Pretend I don't exist. Hate me, but go." The level of sacrifice shattered him. Even now, freshly operated, having been a minute from death, her only instinct, her only thought was to protect him. The real estate magnate, the man who never lowered his gaze to anyone in the country, fell heavily to his knees on the room's floor. The sound of the thud echoed off the 4 walls. Julian interlaced his clean, large hands with his wife's small, cracked and bruised hands. He clung to them and rested his forehead against the metal bed rail, surrendering completely. "It's over, Violet," Julian said, lifting his tear-stained face, his voice firm but laden with absolute devotion. "The hell is over. I know everything." Violet stopped struggling. The heart monitor abruptly stabilized its rhythm, as if her heart had skipped a beat. What? What?" she stammered, unable to believe it. "I know everything," Julian repeated, squeezing her hands and kissing her bruised knuckles. "I know the names. Arthur Delaney, Fraser Reynolds. I know about the account in the Cayman Islands, and I know about the thugs who intercepted you at the mansion gate. I know you sold your rings, your clothes, your entire world to pay them the ransom for my freedom. I know you left me knowing I would hate you, just to save my life." The impact of Julian's words broke Violet's last wall of resistance. The icy mask she had worn for 9 months of agony and humiliation completely crumbled. A primitive sob laden with pain, loneliness, and relief escaped her throat. "I was so scared, Julian," Violet cried, squeezing her husband's hand with all her strength. "Every day I believed they were going to hurt you. When you yelled at me last night in the alley, I thought I had lost you forever. You never lost me." Julian rose from the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and carefully wrapped his arms around Violet's shoulders, drawing her to his chest. He held her as if she were the most fragile crystal in the universe. "I never stopped loving you, not for a single second, even when pride blinded me. Forgive me for doubting you. Forgive me for not seeing that the love of my life was sacrificing herself for me. Forgive me for letting you fall into such misery." Violet buried her face in Julian's stained, wrinkled shirt, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne, feeling safe for the first time in almost a year. They cried together, clinging to each other in the gloomy hospital room, purging the poison of separation. After a few minutes, Violet pulled back slightly, her eyes injected with sudden panic. Her hands flew instinctively to her flat belly. "The baby!" she gasped, terrified. "Julian, my baby. No, I'm sorry. Tell me I didn't lose him." "He's alive." Julian smiled through his tears, stroking his wife's sweaty hair, looking at her with the greatest adoration a man could profess. "Our son is alive, my love. He's a warrior just like his mother. He's in the incubator recovering, but he's alive and safe." Violet closed her eyes and let her head fall onto the pillows, exhaling a sigh of relief that emptied all the air from her lungs. "Our son," she murmured with an exhausted smile gracing her gaunt face. Julian looked at her in silence for a few seconds. Love and guilt swirled within him, but were quickly replaced by a different, darker, colder energy. The men who had done this to his wife, the cowards who forced her to clean rubbish, 8 months pregnant, under death threats, were going to pay with blood. This was no longer about corporate business. This was a personal war. and Julian Griffin was going to use the full weight of his empire to erase them from the face of the earth. "You're going to rest now," Julian whispered, kissing her forehead. "You're going to get strong for our son. I promise you on my own life that no one in this damn world will ever touch you again. The fear ends today." Violette opened her eyes, noticing the killer glint in her husband's pupils. She knew Julian. She knew the man of steel was about to unleash his true power. "Julian, what are you going to do?" Julian stood up, adjusting his ruined suit, adopting a stance that projected unbreakable, dark, lethal power. "Arthur and Fraser think they stole my empire by blackmailing my wife," Julian replied, his voice echoing in the empty room like a death sentence. "I'm going to show them what happens when they awaken the true owner of hell. From today, I am the one who dictates the rules, and I won't leave them even ashes." The awakening of the beast. Julian Griffin emerged from the recovery room with a transformed face. The vulnerability and tears of the past few minutes had evaporated, giving way to surgical coldness. His footsteps echoed in the corridor like hammer blows. Reese, who was waiting outside, immediately stood at attention, noticing the aura of death emanating from his boss. "Reese," Julian said, without stopping, "I want the assault team members in position. We're no longer collecting information, we're executing." "Sir, Arthur and Fraser are in a private meeting at the Sydney Business Club, celebrating the quarter's close," Reese reported, keeping pace with the magnate's swift strides. "They think you're still holed up in your office or your luxury restaurant? They have no idea we found Miss Maxwell." Julian stopped in front of a large window overlooking the city. The sun was beginning to peek from behind Sydney's mountains, tinting the sky a violent red. "They think they have me cornered with their false evidence," Julian murmured, his voice dropping to a lethal register. "They don't know that last night I bought the Golden Wattle building. They don't know I have the complete file of their original fraud that my wife paid to conceal. And, most importantly, they don't know they just turned a businessman into a butcher." He pulled out his phone and dialed a high-priority number. "District Attorney, Julian Griffin here." "Yes, the same. I have a package of evidence involving money laundering, aggravated extortion, and attempted murder. I want arrest warrants ready within the hour. I don't care who I have to wake up. If the judge won't sign, I'll buy the courthouse myself." Julian returned to the entrance of the neonatal ICU before leaving. Through the glass, he saw the small incubator where his son, a tiny being connected to wires, fought for every breath. The child had his father's strong features and his mother's unbreakable resilience. "Hold on, little one," Julian whispered against the glass. "Your dad is going to clean up the world, so you and your mum never have to be scared again." Minutes later, 3 black armored SUVs sped out of the hospital. Julian was in the back seat, reviewing a tablet with his enemy's final banking movements. Arthur and Fraser had made a fatal mistake, underestimating the love of a man who has nothing to lose because he has already regained everything. The operation was swift and silent. As the sun finished rising, Griffin's SUVs and 2 federal police patrol cars intercepted the former partners in the club's private car park. Arthur, fat and arrogant, dropped his whiskey glass upon seeing Julian get out of the vehicle. Fraser tried to run, but Reese tackled him to the pavement before he took 3 steps. Julian approached Arthur, who was trembling like a leaf. Julian, this is a misunderstanding. We can negotiate," Arthur stammered. Julian didn't say a word. He delivered a dry punch to his stomach that knocked the air out of him, then leaned over him, whispering in his ear, "Violet Maxwell sends her regards from the hospital. She survived, and now you two are going to wish you were never born. You won't be going to a luxury cell, Arthur. You'll be going to the general population, where prisoners know very well what happens to those who touch a pregnant woman." As the police led them away in handcuffs, Julian watched their paper empires crumble. He had recovered the evidence. He had destroyed his enemies, and for the first time in 9 months, he could breathe without feeling ashes in his lungs. The price of redemption, 3 months later. The Griffin mansion in Point Piper was no longer the cold, silent mausoleum it once was. The garden was full of fresh flowers, and the air vibrated with new energy. On the terrace, under the shade of a large oak tree, Violette sat in a wicker rocking chair. She wore a white silk dress that highlighted her recovered beauty, though her hands still bore small scars, marks she refused to erase with laser surgery because they said she was a survivor. In her arms slept Leo, the baby, who had spent 6 weeks in the incubator, now strong and healthy, with rosy cheeks that were the center of his parents' universe. Julian stepped onto the terrace, taking off his suit jacket, approached from behind, and kissed the crown of his wife's head. Then he gently stroked the baby's tiny hand with his index finger. "How are my treasures?" Julian asked, his voice full of a tenderness no one in the business world would believe possible. "We're good, Julian," Violet replied, giving him a radiant smile. "Carol called a while ago. She says the new restaurant's renovation is going wonderfully. The employees can't believe they're now partners in the business." Julian sat beside her. After the storm, his first action was to close the Golden Wattle. He fired Alistair with a lawsuit that left him on the streets and reopened the venue under the name Violet's Miracle, handing over management and part of the shares to Carol and his wife's former colleagues who helped her when she had nothing. "It's the least I could do," Julian said, taking Violet's hand. "But none of it makes up for what you went through. Sometimes I wake up at night and still see you in that orange alley." Violet placed a hand on his cheek, stopping his words. "That orange uniform is in the past, Julian. It was the price I paid for us to be here today. Don't see it as a humiliation. See it as our armor. It taught me I'm stronger than I believed. And it taught me you were worth every drop of sweat." Julian pulled her close, embracing her and the baby in a protective circle. The man of steel had learned that true power resided not in bank accounts or 40-story buildings, but in the capacity to sacrifice for what one loves. "I promise," Julian whispered, looking at the city horizon he once sought to conquer and now simply inhabited with peace, "that the rest of my life will be dedicated to serving you and our son. You'll never be alone again. There will never be secrets again." Violet rested her head on her husband's shoulder. The afternoon sun bathed the scene in a golden light. The story that began with a fabricated divorce, an invented betrayal, and a humiliating cleaning uniform ended there with the victory of love over ambition. Julian Griffin, the magnate who had it all, finally understood that he was only truly rich the day he found his wife cleaning tables in the darkness, because that day his heart beat again. Justice had been served. The enemies were behind bars, and the family was united. The ghost of the orange uniform could finally rest in peace.